Hello my loves. I read so much this month. I don't really know what's happened to me because generally for the past like few months I've been reading on average 5 or less books a month, and somehow in March I was able to read 13, and I don't really know how I managed to do that, but I did, and it's been great. I've read so much. I found so many things that I really enjoyed. I also found some things I really did not enjoy in the slightest, so we definitely have a mixed bag here of things that I think were really good and things that I think were really not so good. I apologize in advance for the length of this video. If you've been here a while, you know I'm a bit of a waffler. I yap, I talk a lot, even when I try not to, so I am envisioning this is going to be quite long. Apologies. I will try and put somewhat helpful chapters and timestamps in for you, so you can skip to the genres or books that you're most interested in. I'd love to know what you've been reading. What have you been loving? What have you been hating? Please do tell me, and if you've read any of these books that I'm talking about, I'd also like to know your opinion on them. Okay, so we're separating into genres loosely as best as I could. I've kind of themed these together. I read a lot of dark academia and Gothic this month, so predominantly that's what we're going to be talking about, and there's a few at the end that don't really fit into that I've kind of lumped all together. So let's look at the dark academia first. The first dark academia that I read this month was Gothikana by Runyx. This is not dark academia, but it's always marketed as dark academia, so I left it in this category. There's actually 3 books in here that I don't think are dark academia at all, but they were marketed as such, and therefore I've left them that way, and this is the first of that. I was fully expecting this to be one of the worst things I'd ever read in my life. I remember watching the Book Leo's video on it years ago when she read it. I found that video very enjoyable, but based on what she was saying and the bits she read from it, I was not expecting this to be good. With that being said, it was nowhere near as bad as I was actually expecting it to be. So I actually ended up rating it 3 stars, which feels quite high for it, but I will explain to you why I ended up settling on that. In case you're unfamiliar, this book got very popular a few years ago, I think now, on TikTok. It was like, yeah, this dark academia sensation, and it basically follows a character called Corvina. She makes such a huge deal out of her name being Corvina and it meaning raven. Just a little side note, I know what she was going for with that, because obviously, like, you know, ravens are from the corvid family, but she gets really annoyed that someone assumes her name means crow, I think, even though, again, corvid is an umbrella term. I then actually googled it afterwards, and corvina actually is a type of fish. It's a type of sea bass, or a variety of grape that is used for wine. So her getting so up on her high horse about that was hilarious, but I think that just perfectly summarizes the pretentiousness of this book. Anyway, we follow her, we follow Corvina, right? She has, up until the start of the book, she's lived a very secluded and isolated life with her mother in this little cottage, not really interacting with people very much. When her mother dies, Corvina is offered a place at Varenmore Academy, which is like an academy for interesting people. I don't know, like the different people. So basically what it is, it's the school that Wednesday goes to in the TV show Wednesday. That is basically what it is. It's a university. There's loads of other weird people there. She feels like she fits in, but she also fancies the fuck out of her teacher, and there's also murders going on, and he potentially might be the murderer. That's like the vibe of this book, right? So here's the thing. This book tried very hard to be dark academia in a purely aesthetic sense. Having quotes from classic literature and like an aesthetic picture at the beginning of every single chapter doesn't make your book dark academia. This had a lot of elements that you would expect in it. Like, it had an old Gothic castle, it's a university setting, there's like dark magic, murder, mystery going on. You know, those are kind of core things in a lot of dark academia. The thing it was missing was the academia. There is no focus on studies or the pursuit of knowledge, or I suppose you don't have to, but a lot of dark academia then follows like the elitism and class warfare and struggles of academia. There was no focus of that, any of that on this, or even really on studying. at all. It was purely just there for an aesthetic backdrop, really. The main plot, with, you know, not with spoilers, is really that students just seem to keep committing suicide, but there's no real like reason or warning for it, and it just seems like something else is going on. So it's almost like, it's not murder mystery, but it is, you're like trying to find out who's causing this or what's actually happening, right? This is just entirely overshadowed by the romance that's happening between Corvina and her teacher, whose name I don't really remember because honestly he had no personality at all. There was the thing there of like the teacher maybe being one of the suspects that like could have made it more interesting or increased some tension or whatever, but honestly the whole people are dying just felt very forgotten about. It felt like it wasn't really fleshed out or focused on enough at all, and it just took a backseat purely to focus on the romance, which is fine. If you're gonna write, you know, a gothic romance, go for it, fine, I love that. Don't try and make it something else that it's not. Don't try and make it dark academia when it's not. This is a romance with a tiny little bit of murder as a subplot. The best way I can describe this is that it did kind of just feel like Wednesday fan fiction. It's not Wednesday fan fiction because this actually came out before the show came out. I appreciate the Addams Family has existed for ages before that, but it did just feel very, very similar to that show. So if you enjoyed that show, you might enjoy this. I don't think it was particularly wonderfully written. I don't think it was awful either though. It just generally felt a bit shallow, and like the thing that made it interesting was the mystery of what was happening at the school, not the romance. If that had been focused on more, I think it would have been better than it was. The next book is another one that was marketed as dark academia and is definitely not. I know that this is going to turn into a rant because I really didn't like this book. I think this is the only one that I was really angry about. The rest of the books are quite positive. I'm not going to complain too much today, I promise. This is The Maidens by Alex Michaelides. I hadn't really heard much about this book. I literally got it just because it was available immediately on the library. It seemed like it could be interesting. Now, if you've been here a while, you might remember my review of The Silent Patient by Alex Michaelides. I did not particularly enjoy that book either. I didn't hate it quite as much as I hated this one, so I thought I would give his writing another try and see if maybe this is better, because it was in a setting that I felt I would enjoy more. It was set in Cambridge, again an elite university, and there was again deaths happening of female students, and potentially it had something to do with this group called the Maidens, who were like part of this professor's class. So it sounded like it could be really interesting, and again it was described in the library listing as dark academia. It is not, and I was angry the whole time reading this. I have genuinely very intense, and I appreciate one-sided beef with Alex Michaelides after reading this and The Silent Patient. Let's just get into it. So this basically follows, I can't remember what the character's name is, but she's a specialist group therapist. Allegedly, we'll get on to why that's an issue in a moment. She receives a call from, I think, her niece, I think that's the relation, to say that they found a body on campus where she's at uni, and she thinks it might be her friend because she's been missing. She hasn't come home. A group therapist lady goes to Cambridge, where she also went to uni, to be there to support her niece, but when she gets there, she basically just ends up getting overly involved and deciding that she's going to try and solve this murder because she is convinced it is this professor who has this little group of students that are in like a little elite club that they call themselves the Maidens, but no one's taking her seriously. The police won't listen, no one else is listening, so she decides to stay so she can find proof that it was that professor. I'm just gonna say it. I really don't like Alex Michaelides. I've decided I really don't like him. Obviously, I've never met him. I don't really know him as a person, but just based on his books, I don't like him. I feel like I should have learned from The Silent Patient that I don't really like his writing, because I think I rated that 3 stars, so I thought I would give it a chance. The Maidens, I rated 1 star. There was not a single thing I liked about this. Really, I could have rated 0 stars. I also could have DNF'd it, but I was so angry that I kept reading it, and it was also quite short. So firstly, I have no idea if he himself himself actually intended for this to be like dark academia. But like I said, that's how it was listed or described when I got it from the library. So whether that was just like a marketing decision or whether he did that himself, I don't know. If that was the intention, this was a piss poor example of trying to write dark academia. And if he was doing that, I think it was written by someone who didn't understand what dark academia is. I talked about Runyx and it being purely for aesthetic. I think Runyx still has a deep love for dark academia and the aesthetic and the vibe, so I'll give them a pass. If he intended to write this as dark academia, I don't think he really understands it. If it was just a marketing decision afterwards, then maybe, you know, I'll let him off. Setting something in Cambridge does not make it dark academia immediately. Having a mention of a secret society, an elite secret society, but not having it be relevant to the plot at all or really involved much in the plot does not make it dark academia. Having vague clues to the murder in ancient Greek does not make it dark academia. Again, there is no academia in this. There is nothing of the things that you would expect or would include to be able to call something dark academia. This is just a thriller that is set in a university. That's all it is. And I know that's what he writes, so maybe I should have expected this, but when I saw the description and the way the blurb is written, I was like, oh, maybe he's doing something slightly different. This sounds like it could be interesting, which is why I decided to give it another try. My main criticism with this book is the psychology element of it, and this was my criticism with The Silent Patient as well. As far as I'm aware from my very limited research into Alex Michaelides, he studied psychology and worked for 2 years as a psychotherapist, which to be honest is not really a very long time to have experience in that field. However, from the way that he writes, he thinks he's an expert, and he is not. In my opinion, the way this was written, it's written in a way that makes it seem more psychological than it actually is, or seem cleverer than it actually is, when if you have studied that or been in any sort of psychology job for more than 2 years, you can tell that this is actually a very basic knowledge, or is written in a way that you know is just going to appeal to others but is actually really inaccurate. The most stereotypical thing, which also came up in The Silent Patient, is the constant obsession with the therapist characters wanting to know about people's childhood, not in their professional roles, when they're just meeting people out and about. They want to know about everyone's childhood or their parents or what happened. That's not realistic. Therapists don't do that. They are able to leave that at work and not do that to every single person that they meet. And it's just a really stereotypical, unrealistic way of portraying therapists. And also, it's not the 1880s anymore. Can we stop having everything be so Freudian? You know, yeah, childhood plays a really big impact on your development, obviously, your views, your psychology in general, but it is not the be all and end all. You can't attribute everything, as he seems to do, to that. There are other things that happen in people's adulthood later in life and also just biology, but he like boils everything down to that so stereotypical view of tell me about your relationship with your mother, and it's really frustrating. But also the way he like ties this in sometimes is like, for this book specifically, it was like, well, she'll be able to solve a murder because she can tell everything about everyone just from talking to them for 5 minutes because she's a therapist. That's just not true. It like, he almost like paints psychotherapists as these like mystical beings that just absorb other people's emotions and thoughts like a sponge and then suddenly know everything about people. Just really irritating. And if you are in that world and you read that, you can tell that this is just not accurate, and it just then makes the story not enjoyable because it's so fake. When it's not like that stereotypical tell me about your childhood. Actually, the therapist's responses to things in this book were incredibly harmful, and I saw some other reviewers saying similar. So she's a group therapist, right? Apparently a specialist group therapist. In my opinion, she should not be running groups at all because she clearly doesn't know what she's doing. But anyway, this is not really a spoiler because it's in like the first chapter, but in her group there's this guy who is clearly very unwell. He should not be in group therapy to begin with, but he's very unwell and very disruptive in the group because he's unwell. Her response first is like, yeah, I'll just let all of the other group members be really mean to him because it looks like he can handle it and they'll sort it out amongst themselves, which is not how that works and not a good approach at all. But also he pulls her aside at the end of the group and like lifts up his shirt, and he's quite badly harmed himself, right? And he shows it to her, and her response is basically like, in her head she's like, well, I'm not going to do anything about this because it's clearly just a cry for attention, and her out loud response is, well, just go and see your GP if you want. That is not how you would respond to that. That is so damaging. And all I could think of is like someone reading that who's really struggling with self-harm or their mental health and seeing a therapist in a book. I know it's fiction, so we can't take it as fact. Seeing that in a book from someone who's supposed to be like this specialist therapist, how would you feel about yourself? Like thinking, is that how people are gonna respond to me if I'm honest about things? Like, I just feel like that's a really shitty thing to put in a book. That was within, yeah, the first chapter, and I was already like, you're a terrible therapist. If this whole thing is about you being such a great therapist, I'm gonna be really annoyed because you're not. Aside from that though, just like the annoyance of that, the plot itself in this, I think was just shit. I think it was really bad. Every single male character that the therapist main character meets is like the biggest walking red flag, where it's almost like the author is trying to say, look, this might be the guy, this might be the suspect, clearly there's something weird about him, pay attention to him. Every single male character, until it's just A, all of them are really unrealistic characters, and B, it's just so obvious that he's trying to like throw us for a loop constantly. And then the reveal, the twist, yeah, maybe I hadn't guessed that, but in my personal opinion, I think it was a terrible conclusion, kind of unnecessary, just not really very good. I really didn't enjoy it. You know, like when Pretty Little Liars got to the stage where they were like, we need to have a reveal that no one has made a theory about because we need it to be different to what fans are expecting. Kind of felt like that. You put all of these really obvious hints there, didn't use any of them, then put in this thing that seems really quite random, doesn't really make any sense, and also is just quite horrible. Oh, and then just one, this is a really petty comment. Alex, your little self-indulgent addition of adding the main character from The Silent Patient randomly in it added nothing to the plot, unnecessary, and in my opinion, yeah, was just very self-indulgent of you being like, oh, look at my other character being here, but everyone wanted to see him. Fuck off. Hello, Editing Nikki here, just because apparently I have not complained enough about this book already, and I remembered something that I forgot to say. A complaint that I saw a few times when I was reading other people's reviews of this book was that Alex Michaelides doesn't really seem to know how to write from the point of view of a woman very well, and I would agree with that. I was thinking that before I'd even read the reviews. There was one bit in particular in the book where the group therapist lady goes to see a GP who's like an older man, and she's like, he had a really old fatherly energy, which just made me instantly trust him. And I'm not speaking for all women here, but as a woman who has accessed healthcare many times and has spoken to many older male GPs, I've never once felt like that. What I've actually felt is, oh, this man's not going to understand anything about me and is going to dismiss me as being too emotional or hysteric. So the fact that that was his thought about her seeing a GP, I mean, I'm sure there are some really nice older male GPs out there. Again, I'm not generalizing all of them, but just that seemed like a very unrealistic thing to include. And there were just several other things that just made it quite obvious that this was not a woman or someone who particularly understood them very well. Her reactions to certain things and what she did in certain situations just, I think, just shows a lack of understanding of the female experience. So that was also another negative that I just quickly wanted to add. I promise I will stop complaining about this book now. It was just not an enjoyable book. I don't like him. I don't like his writing. Please never let me read another one of his books again. I'm done. I don't like it. Okay, moving on to more positive thoughts and feelings. I read the entirety of the Atlas 6 trilogy. I only have the first two books. The other one I have digitally, but I read all three of them. The Atlas 6, the Atlas Complex, and the Atlas Paradox. If you want a plot overview of what these books are about, I'm really sorry I can't give that to you. One, a lot happens, and two, I was very confused for a lot of these books, so I don't know that I would really be able to give the best summary. Aside from a group of 6 magical people, they're called Maidens in this book rather than like wizards or anything. Like the most powerful Maidens in the world are selected to go to this like elite school, or like this elite place called the Alexandrian Society. They have to like study there for a year, but then at the end of the year one of them will be removed. Only 5 of them can remain. That's basically the overview, specifically of the first book, but kind of the whole series. So I'll give my thoughts one by one, and then I'll just give like a series overview. Starting with the Atlas 6, I think this is the strongest book of the whole trilogy. I rate this 4 stars. No, I rate this 4.5 stars actually. I quite enjoyed this as the first book in the series. So I know this seemed to get quite mixed reviews, this series in general, but the first book as well, of people either like really enjoying it or people feeling like it was quite boring, quite slow, too character focused, and all of them were like pretentious assholes. I feel like that's a kind of dark academia in a nutshell. I personally quite enjoyed it. I quite liked all the different characters. Are they particularly good people, most of them? Absolutely not. Are they all quite pretentious? Yeah. Did I understand most of what they were talking about? No, but I still had a good time for the most part. It is very character focused. There is a vague semblance of plot, but it is mainly the characters that are pushing it forward. We're mainly following them rather than like a set detailed plot or story, and I don't mind that if the characters are interesting enough, and I found them interesting enough in this. I feel like the first book was a really good setup for further character development and sort of giving enough into characters' backstories to want to then read the next one. There was, I suppose, enough of the plot and things that maybe didn't make sense, or things that you wanted to find out more about in terms of like why they're there, you know, what happens at the end of the year where one of them is removed from the program, who it's gonna be. You know, there was enough things like that in the plot. It carried it for me. I was interested in that, but I was also just interested in finding out more about the characters and what they were gonna do and how they were gonna react to different things. So then the second book, The Atlas Paradox, picks up pretty much right where we leave off at the end of the Atlas 6. I'm not going to give too much information about the plot of these ones because it will kind of give spoilers for the whole series, so more just like my thoughts. It does still follow the similar sort of slow pace, very character focused. I didn't enjoy this quite as much as the first one. Not a huge amount of difference. I rated it 4 stars instead of 4.5, with the main reason being it just felt like it was more obvious in this one how slow it was, and that the plot was kind of dragging. Not really a lot happened, even though there was promises of action or promises of things happening. That was then just like not followed up on as much. I did enjoy digging into the characters a little bit more and finding more out about certain ones. They all kind of were doing their own little things, or maybe like in pairs doing their own little things, which, you know, you got to then see more of different dynamics and relationship dynamics between them, which was also quite interesting. But it did kind of almost feel like you were constantly waiting for something to happen, because, you know, there were things going on, threats and things that might be happening and that could potentially be bad, and it just felt like you were constantly waiting for that, or for that development in that, and it just kind of dragged a little bit. Then the third book, The Atlas Paradox, that is what it's called, right? No, The Atlas Complex, that one. It went downhill here. So this was a 3-star. It kind of progressively, my opinion of this series got lower and lower as I went through. For this book, I was pretty bored for the first half, because it was getting to the point now where the plot was dragging so much, but it just felt like for not really any reason, because we weren't really getting that much more character development at this point either, or like finding out more about their lives before they came to the Alexandrian Society or anything like that. It did just feel like it was dragging for no real reason. And then for the second half of it, I was just angry. Now look, I don't need a happy ending. I really don't. And I wasn't angry as in like it was bad. That obviously that's why it's still 3 stars, because it was still enjoyable. But I was just angry at the decision that was made. Olivie, why did that have to be what you chose to do? It wasn't a good ending, okay? It was not a good ending. And I think a lot of people were unhappy about the ending and the last book in general. I do think it's definitely by far the weakest of the trilogy. But I think it kind of speaks to a larger problem if I look at the series overall, it's that this entire series felt like it was building up to something. It always felt like we were on the verge of getting something, or things were happening so we could get to this bigger point, and then it just never happened. We never got that. Even though I did enjoy the characters and I like a character focused book, I think even with that, it felt like we were building things for these characters, but we just never really found out properly about them. We didn't get the development that felt like it was promised from the first book. We didn't get information about their backstories or their motivations. I have no idea why Raina did any of the things she did. I don't know anything about her. There was certain characters that were focused on a lot more than others, so you found out a lot about them and maybe why they did things or how they responded, but then there were other characters that just almost felt forgotten, and then you were just left with a lot of questions and it feeling quite confusing as to why certain things happened or they did certain things. And then I think that's just an overall bigger problem, that by the end of this series the plot was so confusing. I didn't really understand what was going on or why. I didn't really care about all of the chapters in the last book that were from various different people's point of view from this other little collective group that had come together, because we were getting backstory about them and their lives, but we weren't getting backstory about the main characters. A, it was slowing the plot down, B, it was detracting from the main story, and C, it was just making everything a lot more confusing. It was so hard to follow by the end. I think this series had an awful lot of potential, and I think it could have been really good, and I think just certain things made it not quite live up to that. I still don't think it was bad, and I still, on the whole, enjoyed it. I don't know how readily I would recommend it. I do in general like Olivie Blake's writing, so I will definitely read more from her. I just think this series was maybe quite ambitious. It didn't quite meet what it was supposed to, or what it promised, or what it felt like it could meet. And then the final in the dark academia or dark academia adjacent genre is Bunny. I was fully expecting to absolutely love this book. It seems entirely up my street, right? Surrealist horror, characters going mad, cult-like group that you don't really know what's going on, dark academia as it was marketed. Seems like it would be right up my street. Unfortunately, I really didn't enjoy this book, and I was actually quite disappointed by not enjoying it. I rated it 2 stars. I don't think it's a bad book. I think it just wasn't for me. I just couldn't get into it. I didn't really feel connected to any of the characters, which was a bit of a, I think a bit of a significant letdown, because this book isn't really like plot heavy. It's very character vibe heavy, and I just didn't connect with the characters or the vibe. The main character I really didn't like. I think we didn't really get enough explanation or insight into her for me to really feel any sort of sense of emotion towards her for the main part of the book, or for pretty much all of the book. She just felt like she was whining for no reason. I couldn't really understand why she was the way she was, or she'd ended up the way she was. I mean, to an extent, sometimes I could understand her actions, but for the most part, I really didn't. I also didn't really understand what was going on, which I don't mind a lot of the time. That's the thing. I quite like books where I don't really know what's happening or why, and I'm just a bit confused in a good way, if it's done in a good way. For this, I just felt like there wasn't really enough fleshed out or explanation of things happening, specifically around the bunnies, which are like the cult group that the main character ends up, Samantha, that's her name, that Samantha ends up falling in with. I suppose there's kind of like an element of magical realism in it. Magical realism where you're not really sure what's going on or why or how. Again, generally I like, but for me, I don't know what it was about it. It just didn't hit right. I was just kind of left feeling quite flat. It didn't really affect me in any way at all. I didn't feel any emotions or draw or connection. I just felt kind of bored a lot of the time, honestly. Part of it might have been as well that I just personally didn't vibe with the writing style of this book. I appreciate writing style, and what you enjoy is all very personal preference, which is probably why there's a lot of people that enjoy this book so much. But for me, it just felt like descriptions of things and way things were explained was very wordy and lengthy for no real reason other than to kind of make it seem poetic or more flowery, and it actually just felt quite frustrating by the end of all of these long rambly descriptions of things, which I mean maybe could have been communicating the unwellness of the main character, but it didn't feel like it communicated that to me. It just felt like it was rambly for no reason, which I suppose could be an accurate description of me, actually. It just didn't vibe with me. I can't really, it's not bad. Like I said, I don't think this is a bad book. I do think there are, well, obviously there's many people that enjoyed it, and I can see to an extent why people enjoyed it. I just think it wasn't for me, and that's fine. That's okay. I don't know if I've made this up, but I do seem to remember this being recommended quite a lot as dark academia. Maybe it's just on TikTok or people sort of recommending it in that way. I don't know if it was actually marketed that way, but just in case you have seen that as well, this is not dark academia in the slightest either. I don't really know why it's marketed like that. Again, it's a university, but it's not dark academia. Moving on to Gothic reads this month, because I did read a fair few Gothic novels as well, which I enjoyed. I don't know why I've moved away from Gothic recently, because it is one of my favourite genres. The first was We Have Always Lived in the Castle by Shirley Jackson. This was a short little read that I've been meaning to read for a really, really long time. I really enjoyed this. I rated this 4 stars. I also, for this, can't really give you a super detailed plot overview. One, because I read it quite close to the beginning of the month. Also, I would say this is also not really a plot book. This is a vibe book, but there is a plot. It's just a weird little book about weird little people. The setting of this particularly I really enjoyed. I thought that it was very atmospheric. Because I haven't seen the film, I have no reference or anything to base it on, but I could really imagine the house, I could imagine the people, the whole town or village, wherever they lived. Just the atmosphere of it was, I think it was written in a way that it felt very immersive. Even though it was so short, like I could still really feel like I was in that world and the house and the weird things that were going on. The view you get where it is all from, I can't remember her name, the main character, who is definitely quite unhinged, where everything is from her point of view, I think that almost gives more of a look to it of, yeah, things feeling quite surreal and something's off, but you can't quite put your finger on it. Like, something's very obviously off. You're not really sure why or fully what's going on, which gives it a sort of creepiness. I wouldn't say this is scary. I think it technically is counted as horror, which is why I never watched the film, actually, because I am a certified wuss. I get scared very easily. There is definitely a creepiness about it where you're just like, what's going on? I don't really have a huge amount to say other than that, because this is quite a short read and I did enjoy it. The only thing that I think would have made this maybe a 5-star for me was if we maybe got a little bit more of why certain things had happened and like what had led to that point. Yeah, a little bit more into the character, the main character herself, and why she had done certain things. I would have really enjoyed that. I think that would have been really interesting, but I think the rest of it was good enough. It gave that vibe enough of just something is off that I didn't mind so much that we didn't get that full depth and sort of dive into that. Next, we have Victorian Psycho by Virginia Feito. Apologies if I pronounced that incorrectly. I listened to this entirely as an audiobook and it was an interesting and generally good experience. I also rated this 4 stars. Follows an odd, very unhinged governess in the Victorian period, as the name would suggest, who goes to work in a quite a fancy household to be a governess to the 2 children that live there, and the strange and bizarre things that she does whilst living there. As the name would suggest, Victorian Psycho, obviously a play on American Psycho, we are in the head of a psychopath. With that being said, there is definitely a darkly comedic element to this book. Now, I've never read or seen American Psycho, so I can't comment on similarity or comparison to that, but this, where it's really short, it was quite gross at times. There was a fair bit of graphic description of harm and quite horrible thoughts that this governess was having. Yeah, it was just quite gross at times, but I think because it was quite short, because of the way it was written and also the narration of the audiobook, it wasn't too awful. It was a very darkly comedic element to it, but also it didn't feel like grotesque or like grotesque for the sake of being grotesque. It was just a dark but enjoyable read, honestly. I don't know how much I would recommend it because I do think certain people really wouldn't like this, and that's fine. There are a lot of reviews that really don't like it. Just as like a little snapshot into her mind and what was going on, and yeah, just the unhingedness of her and the things she was doing was interesting, and I don't want to say enjoyable as in like, you know, hearing all of those things and watching her do all of those things was enjoyable, but it was written in such a way that it wasn't too much for me anyway. My final Gothic read, there wasn't actually as many as I thought there was. My final is Jane Eyre by Charlotte Bronte. Yeah. This, like, I don't really know what I was expecting when I started reading this. I actually genuinely didn't really know what it was about, but no, it's fabulous. This was such a good classic. So in case you, like me, also didn't really know what it was about, you just kind of heard the name. Basically follows Jane, who is a not super well off orphaned girl throughout her life, starting with her being taken in by her quite abusive aunt, to her then going to boarding school and her experiences there, and eventually her becoming a governess in the household of the very ugly, as she keeps saying, Mr. Rochester, who's like dark, brooding, sad kind of man. I was hooked on this very quickly. Jane's narration, like how she tells her story, was so easy to listen to and get into, and also just her as a character. What an icon, what an absolute icon, especially for the time she was written at. Just as a side note, a question. I don't know if anyone know the answer to this. I appreciate obviously all of the Bronte sisters published all of their books under male pseudonyms. I would just be really curious to know if anyone knows this. Did people at the time genuinely believe a man had written this? Because I would be very surprised if anyone genuinely thought a man would be able to write such a realistic depiction of women, and like especially in first person, because it was so refreshing to read a classic where the women in it, like all of the female characters, were like rational and sensible and not just fainting all the time or like really hysteric about everything or described as hysteric about everything. Like it was just really nice to see realistic depictions of women in that time period rather than the really extreme, yeah, fainting. I appreciate everyone was fainting at everything in a lot of classic books. Thinking about you, Dostoevsky, everyone is constantly fainting in your books, not just the women. It was just nice to see a difference there. It was also very refreshing and very funny for Jane to just constantly be calling the main love interest, Mr. Rochester, ugly to his face. Just repeatedly. It was wonderful. And you know what was so great about it is that, like, yeah, he's the classic dark brooding gothic, you know, hero, whatever, but just, yeah, he was really ugly. Like, that was his main character. Description was just that he was really ugly, but she still loved him anyway. It was just really enjoyable. I loved her as a character. I loved him as a character. I loved all of the little like side characters, the other people that worked in the household as well. Her relationships and friendships that she formed with different people over the years. Her getting her sweet moment when she went back to talk to her aunt. Like, everything about this book was just really good. I did start to get a little bit bored at one point, or just like, not bored, but like when we moved, she went off to like a different household for a bit, and I just wanted her to go back to the Rochester household because I liked all the characters there and what was going on there. However, in her going off to that, Charlotte Bronte delivered me a new man to be added to my group of men from classic books I would punch in the face with zero hesitation, in the form of St. John Rivers. I hated that man. It seems to be a thing for me in classics. There's always a male character that I just get vehemently angry about, and it was him. I hated him so much. But again, Jane's handling of that and the way she managed that was wonderful. It was iconic, incredible. I love Jane Eyre. She is fantastic. What a character, what a woman. Yeah, this book was really good. I really enjoyed it. I would really recommend. Very easy to read for a classic. Probably one of the easiest to read classics that I've read in quite a while, actually. Yeah, I would really, so good. I would really recommend it. This was, I don't think I said this was 5 stars. And I'm now determined to read like everything by every Bronte sister ever. Wuthering Heights, I've realised, is one of my favourite books of all time. I don't think this day goes past I don't think about Wuthering Heights. It's such a good book. And now reading this as well, I've realised the Bronte sisters were just some of the best writers to ever exist. So I will be reading a lot of them because wonderful. No notes. Really enjoyable. Okay, for my final category, don't really know what to call it. It's kind of like fantasy, sci-fi, dystopian, but all of these books feel like they have like a similar vibe because they're all in that sort of sphere of not in this world, but they're not they're not quite all the same. You'll see what I mean when we get into it. Anyway, firstly, we have Assistant to the Villain. This was huge, I know, quite a long time ago on TikTok. Again, I'm always late to the party with these kind of books. I got this, again, just because it was immediately available in the library. I don't really know what I was expecting from this book, but it wasn't what I thought it was. I didn't think this was fantasy for some reason. I thought this was like modern day, maybe slightly fantasy adjacent, but it's fully fantasy. It basically follows Evie is our main character. She ends up accidentally helping the villain, who's like a notorious criminal, really bad guy throughout the kingdom, right? She accidentally helps him evade capture, and then he offers her a job and she accepts it because she needs the money because her dad's not very well. And then the whole book is just her being his assistant as a villain. So I didn't really enjoy this very much. I rated this 2 stars as well. I can kind of see why people would enjoy this because it's quite easy to read. It's very grumpy sunshine kind of romance. I was quite impressed, I will say, with the romance itself. It was there, but it was very slow. Maybe a slight spoiler, but they're not together by the end of the book, which is unheard of for me these days in fantasy. So that I was somewhat impressed by. However, the actual story and book itself, it just felt quite shallow to me. The world building was not great. I don't really understand what's happening in this kingdom. I also really don't understand why this guy is a villain. The villain didn't really have much personality. It's also never really explained all of these awful things that he does. It's vaguely alluded to at times, but I could not tell you what he's done that's so bad to earn this reputation or why he's classed as a villain, because he doesn't really do anything. He's fine. He's kind of boring, actually. He just runs his little villain business. I don't know what the business does, and I don't know if that's because it was obviously setting up to, I think there's 2 more books in the series. I don't know if that's all of them or if there's going to be more, and so maybe we find out more in those. I haven't read those yet. I was just left quite confused by the world in general and what was happening, but also him. Something else that didn't really make sense to me was, if we put ourselves in Evie's shoes, all she knows about this guy is that he's awful. He's really, really horrible, and he's done all of these awful things, and like with literally no convincing, especially seeing as she seems like an overly nice person, like to the extent it's annoying. She's just like, yeah, sure, I'll just help you and I'll do these things and I'll have no moral concerns about doing any of them, and I'll just kind of become a villain myself for no real reason. It just doesn't really make sense. I think this book had an idea that could have been quite good, but it didn't really live up to it very well. I may read more. Because like I say, those things might be explained in later books and then maybe actually it's not so bad, but I haven't decided. So maybe I will, maybe I won't. I don't know. Okay, then not fantasy. This is like more like maybe the sci-fi superhero, I suppose. I read Winter Soldier: Cold Front by Mackenzi Lee. Yeah, by Mackenzi Lee. I've wanted to read this book for ages. I say ages, about a month. I started seeing people on TikTok talking about it, and I didn't even know this book existed, and I very excitedly bought it because, in case you didn't know, I love the Captain America films. I really love the Captain America films a lot. Seeing a book form about Bucky, amazing. Instantly bought it. This basically is like, there's like 2 timelines in it. It's split between Bucky as a teenager in the 40s trying to sign up to enlist in the war so that he can help out on the front, and then it's also split between him in the 50s after the war, where he's been turned into the Winter Soldier and he doesn't have any memory of who he is or his life before being the Winter Soldier. I rated this 4 stars. Now, was it amazing? No, absolutely not. It was not. It was very YA. It is a YA book, so I mean, like, I can't be too mad about that. I think I would have loved this as a teenager. With that being said though, there was one part of it, I don't really remember what was actually happening, but there was a description of something that was it was like so graphic, like some kind of injury or harm being had, that I was like physically cringing while reading it. I can't remember, it obviously can't have been that bad, it hasn't like scarred me or anything, but so for it being quite YA, obviously with it being superhero and the Winter Soldier, there's going to be violence in it. But yeah, I wasn't expecting to physically cringe at it. Part I mainly enjoyed of this book was the Bucky in the 40s. Like, I really enjoyed seeing that backstory of him and what he was like pre-Winter Soldier. I kind of wish the whole book had just been that, even if it had then just him being, you know, signing up, serving, and then, you know, turning into being captured and the Winter Soldier at the end. Like, I think that probably would have been more enjoyable. The parts where he's the Winter Soldier were very sad. If you read anything about Bucky Barnes, it's going to be a sad time. I was kind of expecting that, but I think the main enjoyable part of the book for me was the pre that and like his backstory more. Just as a side note as well, this is not based on the films. This is not MCU Bucky. This is more, I think, comic Bucky. So he doesn't know Steve. Him and Steve have not been friends. He's never even met him. In fact, he hates Captain America at the beginning of this book, which was really quite funny. It was still enjoyable though, even as someone who mainly has only seen the films and has not really read too much of the comics. I was this is gonna sound really bad as my reason for not rating it 5 stars, but I was expecting it to be sadder than it was. If this had emotionally destroyed me, then I would have rated it 5 stars, but I'd seen people on TikTok, like the videos I'd seen of it were people reading it sobbing and like saying don't read it if you don't want to cry, and I wanted to cry. I maybe shed a slight tear, but this was nowhere near as sad as it could have been or I was expecting it to be. And this is coming from the person who cries at least 10 times at different points in Captain America: The First Avenger every single time I watched it. And I've watched that film many times and I still cry at certain parts every single time. I am emotional when it comes to Marvel, but specifically the Captain America characters, and I barely cried in this. I don't actually necessarily think this is a 4-star book. Like, not to say that my reviews are dishonest, but the only reason I rate this 4 stars is because it's about Bucky Barnes and I love Bucky Barnes. If, you know, if it had been about, I don't know, someone else that I didn't really care about, I probably wouldn't have rated it that. If you enjoy Marvel, specifically if you really like Bucky, you will probably enjoy this. If you're not that fussed about it, you probably won't enjoy this very much. Then more in the dystopian realm, I finally read the Ballad of Songbirds and Snakes by Suzanne Collins. I read this purely in preparation to read Sunrise on the Reaping, but I am very glad that I did finally read this. This, as I'm sure you're aware, is the backstory of President Snow from the Hunger Games. My overview of the plot or of the book would be Coriolanus Snow being an arsehole for 500 pages. That is what this book is. I actually started reading this when it first came out, which was what, like 2020, I think, or maybe a little bit later, I don't remember, but I started reading it when it first came out and I stopped. I don't know if you'll be able to see. I don't know if you can see, but there's a section where the pages are really yellow. That's where I stopped reading, and I left the like flappy things in place because I put it down and fully intended to come back to it and I just never did. The reason I stopped reading it at that point, even though I was like, what, that's like over halfway through, like 60% probably, was because I started feeling sorry for President Snow and I didn't want to feel sorry for him, so I stopped reading it. I am incredibly glad I stopped and read it now at this point in my life, because clearly I was not emotionally developed enough to read it at that time, because not once did I feel sorry for him. In fact, I just hated him even more the entire way through. So clearly I was not in the place to fully understand the book at the time when I started it. I love Suzanne Collins as an author. The original Hunger Games trilogy, I think I sleep on them, but they are probably one of my favorite series of all time. They had a really big impact on me as a teenager. I read them, I don't remember when I read them, but I know I definitely read them before the films came out, and I loved them. I loved them so much. Loved the films too. I think they are just, they're such good books and such a good series, and I know that she can write very well. And I think in Songbirds and Snakes she did a fantastic job of showing Snow's character for what it really is. This is not a villain origin story in the sense of like, this is why he did the things he did, or this explains his personality and why he became an arsehole. To me, this is more, he has always been an arsehole. He was always going to be like this no matter what happened, and this is just showing that he is just fundamentally a shitty person. And I think she did it very well. I think she showed his bigotry, his entitlement, his arrogance perfectly in a way that was obviously subtle enough that when I tried to read this however many years ago I didn't pick up on it, but reading it this time it was glaringly obvious. I ended up rating this 4 stars. I do think it was really good. I think it was very well written, and I do think it's a good insight into his flaws as a character without apologizing or making it seem like it's an excuse for what he does. The only reason I didn't rate it 5 stars is just because I hate him, and reading a whole 500 pages about him was difficult at times. It was a really good book, and if you like The Hunger Games, I'd really recommend it. If you've never read The Hunger Games or you don't like them, I'd still recommend it because Suzanne Collins is amazing. But like I said, I literally read that just in preparation to read Sunrise on the Reaping, which was the last book I read of the month. My summary for this is emotional harm for 400 pages or however long it is. This was so upsetting to read. But really, what else can you expect with Suzanne, really, to be fair? So I think this was perfect. This was 5 stars. I think it not only provided obviously information about Haymitch and his games and what he went through and more about his character, but also I just think overall it provided so much more information, lore, explanation for various things and characters in the Hunger Games world overall. It made a lot of things in the original series, in the original trilogy, have a lot more depth, and you could see links between things more and understand why Haymitch especially reacted to certain things in a certain way or acted the way he did throughout the whole series, but also how his experiences then directly linked to what was happening with Katniss and Peter. As with Suzanne, there's always great political commentary in her book. I think that's one of the things I appreciate about her so much. She does it so well while still writing such good characters and plot and world. It's incredibly impressive. This one particularly focuses on censorship and propaganda. There is also a little tiny bit about the dangers of AI in it, which is interesting. And again, I just think it was done in a very good way, which added more to that world, but obviously still then has things that you can think about and relate to our current world and the climate we live in. So with the games in this book being the second Gothikana, which had double the amount of tributes than there normally is, it was a little bit difficult at times to keep track of who everyone was because there was just so many tributes. With that being said, the characters who were like important to Haymitch or important to the story, I think were fleshed out in such a way that even though we didn't have a lot of time with them, you know, you still felt for them. They still felt like big characters. You still felt their personality, and their deaths were still very impactful, and also all the other various things that happened to them were still very impactful. So although at times it was a bit difficult to keep track of who everyone was, what district they were from and all of that during the games, the ones that mattered you were still able to like connect to and understand like who they were and their story to an extent. I think this is a perfect example as well of what I mean when I say if a book is sad enough and affects me that much, it's gonna be 5 stars. I knew what was gonna happen. I knew exactly what was gonna happen from how everything had been set up and what we knew about Haymitch. And yet reading it and seeing how it all went down destroyed me. I was sobbing. I think this is the most I've cried at a book for quite a long time. And the epilogue as well particularly got to me. The epilogue was perfect. I think sometimes adding those can really make or break. Like sometimes they just ruin everything because like everything's too neat or it explains things too much, but I think this epilogue was perfect and really drove the knife in harder and just made me cry even more. I was actually intending on starting to listen to an Ali Hazelwood book straight after this, but I finished it at like 9 or 10 o'clock at night and just had to sit there for a while and digest and stare and cry and then message my best friend to cry with her about it because she'd already finished it. It was really good, but obviously you have to expect with the Hunger Games that it's going to be sad. I, up until this point in my life, had always really wanted a book about Finnick's games because Finnick has always been my favourite character. Now, I would prefer that Suzanne Collins never even thinks about writing it because I don't even want to imagine the amount of tears I would shed reading that book. Given how many tears I have already shed over Finnick, I don't think I can handle it. With that being said, I hope she does continue to write in the Hunger Games world because it's fantastic. Her books are always so good and I will always recommend them. That's everything I've read this month. I have no idea how long I've been talking for. Again, I'm sorry if that was really long, but I am very proud of myself for being able to read this many books this month. I think a few of them were also on my like 25 and 25 because I've significantly been neglecting that list, so I'm quite glad to have crossed some of them off as well. Again, I would love to know what you've been reading, what you've been enjoying, what you've been hating, so please do let me know. But that's all from me today, so I hope wherever you are, you're having a wonderful day, and I will see you guys soon. Bye.